Hi, my name is Shalini. I thought I would make a video of the reason that I ended up leaving Google because I get asked that question a lot, and thought it would be great to record it while I can still remember the details. Um, I was at Google for about 9 years, and I grew up as a typical Type A, straight A student that chased the grade and uh, really drove for extrinsic validation. It's kind of my drug of choice or no choice. But essentially, I was always kind of top of my class. Even in the workplace, was always kind of cream of the crop or, kind of high performer. And then when I got to Google, which was kind of a dream for me, um, pretty soon after I joined, I hit rock bottom because Google only hires rock stars or people that are kind of top of their class. So I was a dime a dozen. I was mediocre at best. So I was used to getting that extrinsic validation, and I wasn't getting it. So I went into kind of a form of withdrawal, and I crashed. And when I crashed and I looked in the mirror, I realized I didn't really like who I'd become. Um, I was, I had two kids at the time. We had two kids, 7 and 9, and they were really anxious. We'd moved to California relatively recently. My younger one was vomiting every morning from anxiety. My older one was getting bullied in school. When I tried to, when I finally kind of realized where they were at and reach out to them, I couldn't even get them to open the door. I got one of three words: okay, good, or fine. And any more than that, it felt like an interrogation to them. So I realized I couldn't help them. And I'd read all these books about child development and brain development and leadership development, but couldn't even get the door to open. So I was feeling like a complete fail, personally and professionally. So I thought, I'm just going to coast until they fire me uh, at Google. And in the meantime, let me see if I can keep in the connection with my kids because I know they're really struggling and suffering. So it started there, and I started running, a number of experiments to see, like, what would it take to crack the nut with my kids. And the thing that seemed to work, after running a bunch of different experiments, was I tucked them in. And they didn't need to be tucked in; they were old enough, but they didn't mind. I would scratch their backs or rub their backs or just sit at the end of their bed. And there was I'd heard Carolyn Mace. She was this medical intuitive that worked with a bunch of Harvard MDs, and she claimed to be able to diagnose what people had. So she would say things like over the phone, "This person has cancer," and they say, "No, no, we've done all the tests. There's no cancer." And 2 weeks later, the person would be diagnosed with cancer. So she had this ability, to, worked with a bunch of different docs, and what she claimed was that she could see in people's systems what she called these emotional charges. She didn't know how she had it, but she said that anytime you don't release these strong emotional charges, anger, sadness, or fear, they end up staying in your system. And over time, they turn into injury, illness, and disease. And for whatever reason, that really resonated with me. And now there's a ton of research that shows the connection between mind and body. When we're stressed, you get a stomach ache, and over time, you end up with an ulcer. So it's not an alien concept any longer. But it just really resonated with me. And I told my kids this. I said, it doesn't have to be me. You can find some way to release these charges from your system, whether it's running or, talking to someone, talking to me, whatever it is. See if you can release these so they don't accumulate in your system. And I remember one night I went to and started tucking them in, and I would ask them, did anything give you a charge? And I remember the first time my younger son said, yeah, my brother cheated me. I was like, what happened? He said, we were playing tennis, and I beat him, and then his friend came over, and he said he won. And I could tell, he had a really big charge. And so I said, that must have been really upsetting. He was like, yeah. I'm like, that must have been really angry. Yeah. One of the things I'd learned was that no fixing, no correcting, no solving, no saying, like, you shouldn't feel like that about your brother. It was just validating and asking the same kinds of questions so he could kind of release the charge. So he was like, yeah, yeah. And I could tell the charge was coming down. And I started learning, like, when he came back to baseline, and sometimes it took a few minutes, sometimes it took another day. But when he came back to baseline, then I would say, like, what were you feeling? And at the end, it'd be like, anger. I'm like, where'd you feel it? Everywhere. But then over time, it started becoming more nuanced. So then they would say, like, the tips of my ears are burning and I feel humiliation or disrespect or dishonor. I feel, grief or sadness or disappointment. They would get more granular, both on the sensation, and not in the center of my stomach or in the back of my stomach or left side of my throat or, the tingled on my arm, or really specific. And then they started seeing the reverse. And kids are, so much more evolved than I was. But they would say, hey, I got a pit in my stomach. I must be stressed about something. Let me go meditate. And now I know from the research that the body picks up on things far before the conscious mind is aware of it. But I didn't know that back then. The kids were picking up on it. So, we started this process, and what was amazing was we were both sharing stories. I was giving them examples of stuff that happened in my day at work and so on. And I was releasing these charges. I was clearing. And that was the best thing for my kids. And what started happening was we started being able to tune in and seeing these patterns. So what we did as a third step then was once, we shared that piece was we played this game of Sherlock Holmes. So what do you think is going on? I used to say, like, whatever this person did to you, how horrible they made you feel, multiply that by 100. That's what this person was feeling on the inside to have done that thing to you. So what do you think is going on in their life to make their life so difficult or hard? So we would, brainstorm. It didn't matter whether it was true. It was just shadow of a doubt. Enough, of a belief that this person is having a bad day or something's happening to them. I'm not fundamentally flawed. The world's not an evil place. The person's having a bad day. And that's the reason they did this thing to me. So we started doing this. And it was basically empathy. And I learned if I went too early, what are you going after the other person before they had a chance to release the charge? It's like, why are you siding with the other person? So I kind of learned, you had to come back until it was on at baseline. Anyway, we started seeing these patterns in other people and then in ourselves, which was, of course, really powerful. And, I remember what started shifting really dramatically is I'd come home from work. Let's say I had a bad day at work, and I'd snap at one of the kids. And then the previous day, they'd be like, Mom doesn't love me. What did I do wrong? Maybe pay it forward, pick on his brother, and then he yells at his dad, and his dad says something to me. But then what started happening was I'd come home, I'd snap at one of them. They'd say, like, Mom, what happened at work? Tell us the whole story. Sit down. And they'd give me a cup of tea or have me put my feet up, and then we started sharing stories. And it's like they became my counselors, but like we all started sharing these stories. I called it the bedtime to real time routine because it started going from bedtime when we would do this independently to doing this as a family. We all started doing this. We started sharing their darkest thoughts and their greatest fears and their deepest dreams. And my husband was like, what are you doing? They're telling you all this stuff. So we all started doing this. It was this amazing space. We didn't share common beliefs necessarily, but we were able to start to share this. And I didn't realize the power of it until my husband until we had a series of personal traumas. One of them was my husband shattered his right leg and in a ski accident. And one of my sons said, Dad's in a really rough place right now. He's going to probably say things that are going to create charges in us because he's angry or he's scared or he's sad. So what if the three of us huddle and release our charges so that we can be there for Dad because he really needs us right now? I was like, wow, let's try that. So it was amazing. We were able to start releasing. And I remember once my son was going to take some ice in for his leg. And my other son was like, hey, you look like you're carrying a charge. Don't go in there yet. We came out. He immediately started crying. He's like, what happened? Like, something happened at school. Someone on the playground had said something mean to him. And, he was able to shed the tears. And my older son was like, I've been there too, and shared an example of when he was in that place and he was able to release the charge. And then he went to go, help my husband. And so we were able to help him through that. And I was sharing this with one of my staff members at Google. And they said, wow, I wish we could do that here. Like, why not? We started a series of experiments at Google where, we started bringing in things that were happening to us. And I started with just, a 2-minute silence. And then we would do this sharing of like anything we wanted to share for a couple of minutes. Are we above the line or below the line? How present are we right now? And then if we want to share what's going on in our lives, we can. And so people started to share things that were happening in their lives, and we were able to start supporting each other or having empathy for each other in terms of what was going on, to share the workload when someone was having a bad time. And it just became a really powerful demonstration to me of, well-being was rising, creativity, productivity, without actually talking about the work. And this whole notion of separating your emotional self or your work self and your home self disappeared. It was like, what I realized was, I don't have a home life and a work life. I have a life, and my state of mind affects all the realms that I live and work in. And so if I have a bad day at work, of course I bring it home. If I have a rough time at home, of course I bring it to the workplace. So it just started, creating a space between people and within, with my manager as well, just a way for us to start engaging the things that we're creating or making it hard for us to engage or be present or be productive. So anyway, I was continuing this exploration in Google and really starting to deepen connections with my staff. And, it got to the point where HR and my manager say, what are you doing? Like, there are people that don't even want to be in your team because they don't think you have the expertise. And then they're so happy. Are you drugging them? Like, what are you doing? So I was like, I'm violating all the stuff I've learned in terms of management and leadership. And they said, well, we want to hear about it. So I ended up, when they heard about it, they were like, can you, do courses with us, and can you do podcasts with us? And started sharing it more broadly and bringing it with my staff. And then I still kept crashing and burning at Google. And the reason was, in my belief, was that Google was wildly profitable from ads. And so everything else was kind of playtime. You could kind of do whatever you wanted. It didn't affect the bottom line. Costs were never part of the equation. We never talked about costs. So essentially, the engineering directors and VPs were kind of kings of the hill. They were the ones that kind of started the company, ran the company. If you weren't aligned with them and what they wanted to do, you weren't going to go very far. So it didn't matter whether it would affect the end user or whether it was, good for the organization. If it didn't align with what these leaders wanted, it didn't go very far. And I kept crashing and burning. I kept trying to prove myself because, I was like classic type A. So I kept working hard and like killing myself trying to like do the right thing for the organization and for the customer and show them the strategy, silver bullet on a silver platter. And I kept crashing and burning. And finally, like I got so exhausted, and the whole time I was exploring all of these like healing methodologies. Like I was just really drawn to them, and I didn't really understand why, but I just kind of went with it. And so, things like EMDR and TRE and MFR and tuning forks and chronic healing and chakra healing and all kinds of stuff from clinical evidence-based to what my husband, physician, would describe as batshit crazy. I was exploring all kinds of stuff, and as I was continuing to clear these charges, what I call them, or trauma from my system, and it started to clear, I went through a really intense period where after about 6 years, I kind of gave up the pushing, trying, working hard, and I kept crashing and burning. When I came into a new role, a new organization, I was like, you know what? Enough of that. Let me just see if I can align with these leaders, see what they really want, instead of trying to push my agenda and what I think is right for the organization. The stuff I've done in other organizations, what I realized was the usual levers that motivate behavioral change don't apply here. So the stuff I would use before, which was top-down hierarchy, bottom line profit, didn't apply because we were so wildly profitable from ads. So essentially, I couldn't get people to move. I couldn't get behavioral shifts like I could in other companies. The levers didn't work. So as I was clearing, I went through this really intense healing program with a spiritual mentor. And at the end of that, after a couple of months of that, what started happening was I was meeting with these leaders, just like before. But all of a sudden, they would start saying, like, that's what I was going to say. I feel like you were a fly on the wall. That's what I was thinking. I was like, what in the world is going on? Why is there so much resonance? And what I realized was, and I ended up discovering research that validated it, was that as I cleared this instrument, this body, highly sophisticated instrument, that's picking up millions of signals. Essentially, we're picking up the signals, but because of our filters and lenses of our trauma, of our fears and insecurities, it was getting distorted. So what I spit out was a projection of my fear, rather than what this person was really saying to me, or a real synthesis of the information in a way that was meaningful to this person. But as I cleared these filters and lenses of my trauma, you can almost think of it as transducers, millions of transducers on our bodies, in our hearts, in our guts, on our skin, that are picking up data. And it's like they're caked in mud because of all my trauma, my fears and insecurities. And as I cleared them, I was getting cleaner, larger sources of data by tuning into my body. So the decisions that I was making were far more effective, and my feedback was much more resonant. And I started saying, like, let me give you some more people. I was like, I don't need more people. They were like, we're giving it to you anyway. My team, so 6 years of crashing and burning at Google. It's pretty much an individual contributor. In 1 year, my team, I was made a manager. My team grew 10x, and I was promoted to director. There was nothing linear about that process. The idea of director was nowhere on the radar every year prior, not even close, not even in discussion. So it wasn't something I was building up to. So essentially what started to happen was, as I continued to clear, I started being able to take on increasing challenges. And so what I started being able to do is like, and I found research to validate, and I'll share a small bit of it here. So there was an article I read in Wired magazine called "Listening to Your Heart Could Be the Key to Conquering Anxiety." And I was so struck by what I read in the article that I ended up reaching out to the researcher, a professor of neuroscience at the University College London, who since, started working with us in a number of places within Google because it was such powerful research in the business world. But essentially, the thing that drew me in the article, the thing that most drew me in was, she said the way we think things work is we see the snake, we get scared, our heart starts racing. But because of this body of research, this professor, Garfinkel, was focused on, Sarah Garfinkel, it's called interoception, which is the ability to tune into your inner signals, whether it's hunger, heartbeat, pain, emotion. So essentially, because of this body of research, the way it actually works is you see the snake, your heart starts racing, and then you get scared. The conscious mind is the last to know, and our bodies have millions of sensors that are picking up signals way before we're aware of it, consciously. So what she did was, there were two studies. She did a bunch of different bits of research, but two studies I thought were particularly interesting and useful to the workplace. One was a clinical trial with 140 or 120 autistic individuals, and people that are autistic have a comorbidity with anxiety. And so she asked them to estimate their heart rate without measuring anywhere on their body, and she measured it, of course, without them seeing it. She measured it with a pulse oximeter. that was connected to her computer. And most of them said, I don't know, I'll guess. And she said then, okay, do a little bit of exercise, light exercise, jumping jacks, push-ups, so your heart's pounding. So you may feel it now, whether it's in your temple, in your chin, in your chest, in your arm, whatever. The point is you can feel it. So they could estimate more accurately. And so their interoceptive accuracy, the difference between their estimate and the pulse ox would be more accurate. And so what she found was in this clinical trial, over the course of 6 training sessions with them, she was able to dramatically improve their interoceptive accuracy without doing the exercise and without measuring anywhere on their body. And what she found was that a third of them fully recovered from their anxiety. Their anxiety dropped, as their interoceptive accuracy improved, their anxiety was dropping. And a third of them fully recovered from their anxiety. A year later, with no additional intervention, we're still recovering from their anxiety, which is groundbreaking in the field of autistic research and mental health, for which she's received a multi-million-dollar grant already. And so the reason that's interesting is it wasn't about whether their heart was racing or slow. It was simply how attuned they were to their heartbeat that caused their anxiety to drop. And the reason that works is that the body is picking up on the snake, or the fear of the snake, way before the conscious mind is aware of it. So the heart starts racing. It's like evolutionary, it's reptilian. So the body picks it up, your heart starts racing. The mind is like, oh my God, the heart's racing, I'm scared. But if you're connected, your mind and body are connected, then you can say, wait a minute, that's not a snake, that's my boss frowning at me. There's nothing to be scared of. Take a couple of deep breaths, calm the body, and then the mind calms. So that's why it's so powerful. Everywhere, including the business world, anxiety are all-time highs. And so anything that can help us, reduce that anxiety is, of course, very useful. So that's one reason it was very helpful. But the second study that was even more powerful was for the group of investment traders in the London Stock Exchange. And what she did was she asked them to estimate their heart rate the same way, and she measured it with the pulse ox to calculate their interoceptive accuracy. But this time she didn't improve it, she just measured it. What she found was those that had the highest interoceptive accuracy had the highest P&L. In other words, they were making the best buy-sell decisions. And these are investment traders making rapid buy-sell decisions, millions of bits of information flying around, ticker tape and people yelling and whatever. And people would describe those particular individuals with the high P&L and the high interoceptive accuracy as having really good gut instinct. We don't know how they do it. They have really good gut instinct. And what she's claiming is that she's discovered the science of intuitive decision-making, or gut instinct. And the way it works is the conscious mind can't possibly process that much information in the time they have to make a decision. But the subconscious, through the body, is like a supercomputer processing millions of bits of information. Even has an algorithm that can answer, and those that are able to tune into it are making these better decisions. So essentially, it's like, if you think about what's happening in the business world, leaders that are increasing their scope and responsibility are having to process more information before they have to make a decision, not as extreme as an investment trader, but heading down that path. So my hypothesis was that as people rise, those that are rising, maybe they've either developed or already had high levels of interoceptive accuracy. But the great thing is, we now have a metric, a methodology to improve it, and clinical research to back it up. So anyone can do it. So it caught on like wildfire. There were so many leaders wanted her to come in. Fitbit, Google School for Leaders, the VPs and directors in my organization all wanted to see how this was possible, because now it was tied to P&L, business metric. So this was validating what I was experiencing, the power of tuning into the body. So what started to happen, I continued adopting any theories I was drawn to. This is one of the fundamental things I started to learn was, as I cleared, essentially, if you think of how trauma works, trauma fragments us. Physically, we end up with knots, tumors, like injury, illness, disease. We start to develop tumors. And psychologically, internal family system talks about every time you have a trauma, there's a part of you, it's an unprocessed memory that's stored in a separate part of the memory network. And it's associated with almost like a character that freezes in time from the time that the trauma was registered. Trauma is a relative term. Anything that takes you into fight or flight, extreme fight or flight, is what they consider trauma, off-center. And there are different degrees of it. There's capital T trauma, abuse or war or whatever that no one's going to argue with. But there can be, based on your wiring, anything that takes you off-center can be, a degree of trauma, or fight or flight, sympathetic tone. And then when that happens, your conscious mind starts to shut down and the subconscious takes over. So whatever you froze, your age, the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, at that moment in time when you registered as trauma, is stored in the fascia, as it turns out, but in the subconscious and in the body. So you end up with, this unprocessed memory, and it's like a skeleton's in a closet. It can get triggered. So if there's like any of the 6 senses or the 5 senses that's associated with that trauma that triggers it, like let's say the smell is associated with the trauma, or something I see or something I taste, whatever, suddenly subconsciously triggers the trauma. Now you're replaying that trauma like a dead record player. That closet opens, and you're reliving that experience. So you might even act like you were at the age, if you were 6 or 10 or whatever. So you're saying and doing things that don't even necessarily seem rational or seem like an overreaction of the situation. It's almost like a sleeping volcano that erupts, takes over you. Your conscious mind shuts down, your subconscious takes over, and now it's like running the show. So you might say and do things you regret. You can't control your reactions. Many of us have these situations, these events that occurred. You can't, and later on you might be like, God, why did I get so angry or sad or scared or whatever? It doesn't necessarily even make rational sense, but it's because of these things that are, kind of sleeping volcanoes or traumas that are buried in our subconscious that get activated when something that, triggers it. But anyway, as we clear them, we start to become more whole. So instead of all these fragments, like in internal family systems, there's like a whole bunch of characters from all of our major, traumas. And then essentially, any one of the triggers, you're going to be a certain type of character at that moment in time. As you heal the trauma, whether it's through talk therapy, somatic therapy, or any of these healing methods, acupuncture and pranic healing, energy healing, and yoga, and any of these kinds of things that help you start to tune into the body, especially. But look at these traumas, whether it's psychological, emotional, physical, be able to, from a calm place, or stay calm with a therapist or with a healer, a practitioner, a facilitator, whatever. You can actually start to release the trauma from your system and start to remove that neural pathway, that habit pattern a little bit. And essentially then, you can start to diminish that duration, frequency, and magnitude of that emotional reaction that you have, and the amount of sensation that you feel in your body and the autonomic response. So over time, you're talking about neural pathways, they don't change overnight. You start to clear. Well, what started happening is, as I continued to clear this sophisticated instrument, the mud from the transducers, these filters and lenses of my trauma, become more whole. Instead of having 10 voices in my head, do this, don't do that came from my trauma, it started to become more singular a voice, less voices in my head. And when I trusted that voice, that intuition, that gut, that subconscious, that vastly intelligent system, picking up millions of bits of signals, I started to make better and better decisions, started being able to handle more and more complex situations. So I started seeing, and the way it would work, what I started learning was, previously when something would trigger me and I'd be upset, let's say something at work happened, it made me angry or upset. I would try to, don't be angry, I'm supposed to be zen. I'd try to tuck it under a carpet or maybe try to ignore it or hope it goes away. But then it would come up, for a couple of weeks I'd be snappy at the kids or I'd snap at my husband or something. Then when I was like, well, what would happen as I cleared, and I started honoring more of what was arising, the emotion, the sensation, what would happen if I honored what came up? And what that looked like, for example, is it's like instead of tucking under a carpet or telling myself I shouldn't feel it, what would I want? If I was a parent of a spoiled child, what would I want in this moment? And I remember in the beginning, it was like, I want Cadbury chocolate, Snapple peach iced tea, sit in bed and cry. It's like, okay, do it. So I did that, sit in bed. It's like, well, how long could I do this? A couple of days I'd be moping around. Then it ended up being a day, then it being hours. And then what I started doing was, what would happen if I cried until I had not a single tear left? So I tried that. Cried down my elbows, snot driven out of my nose, down my arms or whatever. Nothing left. And I'd get to this point that I thought was depression. Initially, I would try to move away from it, go do something or, listen to something or talk to someone or whatever. But I was like, well, what would happen if I just stayed there? And I started learning how to hold space for what I started to describe as the void. It wasn't depression, it was an emptiness. And when I held that space, what would happen after a while is I'd suddenly get a download of insights of all the things that led up to this point. What was the trauma from my childhood or from my past experiences that caused me to react, that led to the situation, that made me feel the way that I felt? All of these things clicked into place and suddenly I knew exactly what had happened. And I felt some kind of a release in my system. I would either burp or I'd feel my stomach turn or I would cough or something physical I would start to feel. And then it would be like I jumped to the next level of the Mario Brothers game, ready for the next challenge, completely energized. And so what I started learning to do was, as I did this, I started getting greater and greater challenges in the workplace, the most toxic characters, the most toxic programs, the most difficult situations. Towards the end, it was like a gang of directors and VPs coming after me. And my conscious mind would say, oh my God, how the hell am I going to handle that? What I started learning to do was, honor the emotion and sensation that arises, tune into that inner voice, that subconscious that's plugged into all of the data points of everything that's happening. And as I tuned into that, miraculous things started to happen. It was and every time I brought it back to the body and I started to acknowledge and realize that this situation out there is actually a reflection of something within, a trauma within here that I haven't healed, that's being shown to me in some way. And if I'm able to honor the feelings that arise instead of suppress them, I can release the trauma. And then this person or the situation they'd get laid off, they would leave, they would completely change, they would apologize, like miraculous things started to happen. So this was continuing. And I started learning how to ride these tsunamis in the workplace. And I started to see trauma, instead of being this horrible thing I had to move through, because I was learning how to move through it. The amount that I honored what arose, anger, sadness, or fear, was directly proportional to the amount of growth and light I experienced on the other side of that shadow or that triggering experience or that challenging situation. And so essentially, I started realizing, discovering that these difficult triggering situations, these traumas, were actually perfect designs for my evolutionary growth. And so life started to become more like an unfolding mystery and a great adventure. Like, I don't know what's around the corner. It could be drama, it could be trauma. What I do know is that it's perfectly designed for my evolutionary growth. So it just started to become like a game. And there were intense, very intense experiences. But I kept evolving and growing and seeing things and seeing multiple perspectives and then being able to reduce the emotion duration frequency of my responses, so that I could start to honor what was coming up and I could start to create safe spaces for other people. And then my team continued to grow and the situations. And so this is how it was going. And then about a year ago, maybe not a year ago, last December, it became really clear to me. What I started seeing was, I started seeing myself as a mouse in the wheel. I wasn't learning anything new. I was riding these tsunamis. Yeah, these are really challenging situations that I was learning to navigate and honor whatever arose. Even if that meant I made a complete fool of myself, lost had a tantrum. Then when I would look in the rearview mirror at where my subconscious, the path it took me, I was in awe of the beauty and how much more impact I had. So I'd have 100x the impact, or I would get to an outcome much more rapidly than when I was trying to be my Zen version or try to solve it consciously. So essentially, I started to just completely surrender to the flow of consciousness, like my subconscious running the show and knowing so much more than my conscious mind did. And then I would leverage my conscious mind to do some of the nitty gritties. Once I figured out how to do it, I would of course leverage the mind, but I would follow with the heart or the spirit, or lead with the heart or the spirit. And the mind or the ego would follow and support. Because I'm a type 3 in the Enneagram, which is action oriented. I can do a lot of stuff, but when I led with that, I wasn't listening. I wasn't attuned to the situation and the people and places, and didn't make the best decisions then because I didn't have all of the data that was just my left brain was picking up, my conscious mind. So what I started to myself was like a mouse on the wheel. And at first when I heard nobody would leave this salary, title, and brand. No idiot would leave this much money and walk away with no backup plan. But it just kept bothering me. It was I've become everything about honoring this voice, honoring self. So I felt like a fraud. I couldn't do it. So I decided to just go out on a limb and honor it. It's how much is it worth failing to honor and follow my heart? So I did it. I stepped out into the void and I consciously made no plans. And everyone around me, my family, thought I was crazy. I mean, they didn't understand why I was doing this, why I would leave the dream job. I was a director at Google making a lot of money. Why would I leave that on the table for no backup plan? And what has happened, and if experience is any indicator, then what's going to happen is going to blow my mind. And that's exactly what's happened. I'm going to share that in the next video. So I hope you're enjoying the journey so far. Thank you for joining me.